Good evening, everyone. Today marks the 100th episode of the Trends Literature series. It's been an endeavor which we took up innocuously to facilitate the confluence of authors of great literary works and discerning audience. Our passion for literature gave us an outlet during the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous period of the pandemic, which now today Trends has become a platform to reckon with, owing to the participation of stalwarts from the literary world, and has today attained this epic milestone. Thanks to everyone. After deliberations and consulting with a network comprising of people really interested in literature, we zeroed down on a topic for today that is in sync with the 75th year of independence. The conversations with our esteemed authors today will attempt to unravel the challenges and revolutions heralded by the unsung heroes in the struggle for independence, physically and metaphorically. One book, it honors the unsung tribal heroes who fought freedom battle with traditional bows and arrows, affiliates of the mainstream freedom movement, while their contribution remains largely unacknowledged. The other book talks about the enigmatic legend of the Indian music industry. So when Indian classical music was confined to the courts and households of ultra-elite people, it was supposed to be performed live in concerts under the patronage of wealthy connoisseurs. So it was Gauhar Jaan who, in fact, broke the traditional mold by making the art form available to the commoners by recording the compositions on a gramophone. So it became a sensation through the length and breadth of the country. And in turn, she offered whatever she earned, also received for the freedom, donated for the freedom struggle. So welcome Dr. Vikram Sampath and Tuhin Sinha today on our landmark episode. And I must begin the conversation by introducing first Dr. Vikram Sampath. In fact, he's the author of the 6 acclaimed books. And all his books have been really bestsellers and really nationally, internationally talked about. His 2-volume biography, Savarkar, Echoes from a Forgotten Past, and Savarkar, A Contested Legacy, went on to become national bestsellers and were acclaimed by the Prime Minister himself. In fact, I must compliment him that he's been recently conferred the honor of being elected as a fellow of UK's prestigious Royal Historical Society. And I'm very, very delighted to admit that Vikram has been on our platform earlier. It was on the 7th episode and the 51st episode. Vikram, in fact, he's a techie. He's also a financial analyst, and he's done his PhD in music. He's been best known to have the academic courage to challenge the prevailing narrative around a historical figure. So welcome, Vikram, on our platform. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Geeta. And many congratulations on this milestone. I think very well deserved. It's wonderful that you've covered 100, and I hope you cover several more. And on those several more milestones of your journey, you keep inviting Tuhin and me and several other authors again.
Thank you so much. It's entirely a privilege and honor to have you, both of you, to have with us. And both of you are, in fact, part of the growing body of intellectuals that are really the need of the hour. And both of you are really the progressive writers and thinkers that the Indian narrative really needs. With this, I'd like to introduce Tuhin. I'm very delighted to share that he's been our guest on the 16th, 46th, and 84th author interaction. And he's a best-selling author, screenwriter, politician, and acknowledged as a prolific writer with a knack to experiment with different genres. He's, in fact, we all know, is a popular media voice of BJP on primetime TV debates, and he writes extensively on various political issues. So welcome, Tuhin. Such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Shanita, and many congratulations to you on the 100th episode. I think to achieve this milestone in such a short period of time, I think it's been less than 2 years, which means more than, maybe an episode a week, or probably more than that, which is truly phenomenal. So hats off to you. And it is an honor to be on this panel with my erudite friend, Vikram. So great to be on your show.
Thank you so much. And I would also like to congratulate you. And it was really heartening to see your name in the all amazing list of 10 politicians who are also popular riders. I
Well,
just read about it a few days back.
days when you are lucky, and then there are days when you try too hard, you're not lucky. So that it's as simple as that.
Yeah, and I like to delve into my conversation straight away because there's so many people who would like to ask you questions directly. We have Shreya and Dia also, and so many of our eminent guests who are there today are going to ask. So I'll perhaps keep my conversation short and kind of give them chance. People who have really supported us all this while. So Vikram, to begin with you, I must say that what led you to Gauhar and what made you stay with her? Your journey in writing about Gauhar Jaan.
Yeah, thank you, Neeta. I was wondering, how her life and her story fits into the theme for today's, discussion. Though, of course, as a revolutionary, as a trendsetter, as you rightly said, she fits in right there, being the first woman, the first artist of the subcontinent to record her voice on the gramophone in 1902 when this technology came from London. For me, Gauhar Jaan entered my life very, very serendipitously, I must say. It was completely a very happy accident. I was researching, for my first book, Splendors of Royal Mysore, the untold story of the Wadiyars, on the history of the Mysore royal family. And while sitting in the dusty palace archives in Mysore, by chance, I came across this box file full of letters of various, visiting musicians and dancers who were a part of the Mysore palace. The Mysore court was a very, very enlightened court of the Wadiyars, where musicians and artists from across India and even outside the India actually got a lot of patronage. So in that, there was this one little document relating to Gauhar Jaan, who was mentioned there as the first dancing girl of India and also the first recorded artist who came in from Calcutta. And so I was a little intrigued as to why someone who came in from distant Calcutta, someone who was a celebrity, a trailblazer in her times, actually sought refuge in Mysore. And she died in Mysore as well. The file had lots of letters where she was pleading for, to the Maharaja's government, saying, don't cut my income tax, increase my salary and all of that. And the Maharaja's bureaucrats were all, in typical bureaucratic fashion, writing across those letters saying rejected, rejected. So it gave an impression of an aging diva in the last stages of her life, actually beseeching for help. And so that somehow, rankled something inside me. And I think the name itself had a certain ring to it. Maybe very much fascinated by Jaan and Rekha and her portrayal in that evergreen film. On an impulse, I decided, this is about 13, 14 years ago, when I started work on Gauhar Jaan. She suddenly got a new lease of life. Savarkar had overtaken all of this, but suddenly, people are remembering Gauhar Jaan all over again. I just decided on an impulse that this was a story that was dying to be told, of this lady, her trials and tribulations, and also how she overcame the various challenges to go ahead and, as I said, record her voice, which was a big deal in those days. But I did not know how to do it because I just came across her reference in the place of her death. And then I literally, chased her through the length and breadth of India, from Azamgarh, where she was born, to Banaras, Rampur, Darbhanga, Calcutta, Mumbai, Chennai, even outside India to Berlin and London and so on, where there were traces of her, to put together this jigsaw puzzle that her life was. And I think it was a very, very rewarding experience for me personally. And the book came out in 2010, about 12 years ago, but it's still, after so many years, after a decade, it still continued to interest readers. It's been translated into Hindi as Mera Naam Gauhar Jaan. It's already had been translated into Marathi, to Bengali. It won the Sahitya Academy Award. So it really kind of changed, my life in more ways than one. But then it was those 4 intense years of research, of literally chasing her all through, looking for that needle in the proverbial haystack to kind of recreate the life history of this trailblazing woman about whom I'm sure we'll speak to through the course of the evening.
Yeah, so right. And I must tell everyone that already play has been, this book has been adapted into a play by Lilith Dubey, and shortly a movie is going to be made by Ashutosh Korenkar. I'm right, Vikram?
That's right.
Shortly we are going to watch that as well. So coming to you, Tuhin, congratulations, first of all, your book just been released, and I'm sure it has been released, and I think we are the first ones to be talking about your book here today. Really privileged. So, people have always associated tribals with being primitive, backwards, but your book, as Mr. Arjun Munda, who's the Union Minister of Tribal Affairs, says that your book really takes care of the need of the hour to have quality literature on tribal warriors, and it definitely is a rare collection of stories of bravery and sacrifice of India's greatest subaltern heroes. So tell us more on your idea for creating a narrative on the great tribal heroes along with your
Well, Anita, our history always used to be very elitist. It was never really inclusive. Whether it was keeping Savarkar away from the freedom movement, the history written about the freedom movement, or whether it was keeping the tribal revolts out of our mainstream history reading. Unfortunately, till 2014, our history was prejudiced, our history was lopsided, and it was flavored with a certain narrative which the elitist sections of society post-independence wanted us to read. Thankfully, in the last 8 years, the narrative has changed extensively, and a lot of it has to do with the efforts of the Honorable Prime Minister, who's most unpretentious about his own, about his own very humble roots, and the way he has espoused people from humble roots without any people who have come without any entitlements, that has also brought about a change in the way we view these people. So I have grown up in Jamshedpur, a place, and Jharkhand is a place which had witnessed most of these tribal revolutions. So it was but natural to, after writing about 9 different books on varied subjects, it was but natural to look inwards, or to, when you travel the world, you tend to travel homewards. So that is where I was struggling with to discover a new subject after 2018. And in fact, that explains a long sabbatical after 2018. I didn't have a release till 2021. But I thought this was a narrative which was waiting to happen, these were stories that were waiting to be told. And it's actually very fascinating that while we credit the 1857 revolt to be our first war of independence, our tribal mutinies have been taking place from 1870s, if not before, and at least the first big mutiny by Tilka Majhi took place in 1784. And it's very surprising that throughout the 18th century, the early part of 18th century, the same very similar tribal mutinies were taking place across the country, from the northeast to Kerala, to Rajasthan, to Gujarat. So it would have been very unfortunate if these fascinating stories were not documented properly. And I think that is what led me to approach the subject, to embark on the subject. And I have been fortunate to have a very hardworking co-author on it, who was hands-on with the research part of it, Ambalika. So, that is what the idea was. And I'm glad that post Birsa Munda, this only complements the narrative now with the first tribal woman president, almost certain in August. This narrative, the need for these stories is only going to grow. And you will come across more fascinating, similarly fascinating stories in future.
No, fantastic. And it's such a easy read, and very, very, all the 17 stories, I must say, I really enjoyed reading them. I'd like to invite Shreya. She's joining us from London. She's doing architecture there, but she's been the co-founder and co-host with me on a couple of episodes. Yes.
Hello, hi. It's so nice to talk to both of you again after so long, and specifically about these inspirational stories. I just have a small question. So, I mean, we know that the youth will probably take on the baton of leadership in the future. And I just wanted to ask about how you think that these stories, these unheard stories, were important, particularly, things that attracted you to them, to these unsung heroes, and Gauhar Jaan ji, who was amazing and so prolific. What do you think that not only attracted you, but you also feel can be a big learning lesson for our generation?
I go first, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So good to meet you, Shreya, again, and I hope you're doing well in London. So, I mean, the course of the research of that book, it was a revelation for me that, when recording technology first came to India, mind you, this was a foreign technology which came from where you are sitting, London, to India in the early decades of the 20th century, 1902 to be precise. And when this technology came to our subcontinent, our country was in a state of flux. We were still a colony. We Indians did not have the same power that we probably have today. And in such a scenario, the first artists who recorded on the gramophone all over India, north, south, east, and west, were actually women. The men folk stayed away from recording. Usually we associate men with tech and gizmos and all of that. But when it came to recording, it was these trailblazing women who took the lead. There were lots of superstitions that did the rounds, that if you record into that evil English instrument, then you're going to lose your voice, or the gods will be displeased and all of that. But it is truly a tribute. And that was the biggest takeaway and learning for me, and also for people of our generation today, that these women circumvented several challenges. One was, of course, this new technology, for which they even bargained with a European for good fees. Gauhar Jaan used to charge something like 3,000 rupees per recording session, which was a huge amount in those days, but she managed to do it. She was a very shrewd businesswoman, along with being a great artist as well. Now, the other problem, the technology itself was very rudimentary those days, so it came with its own set of challenges. There were no microphones to amplify your voice. There used to be a horn. It was the era of acoustic recording or mechanical recording. So there was a horn fitted on the wall, and the singer had to crane his or her head into that horn and scream as loudly as they could. And depending on how loudly you scream, there was a stylus on the other end which would vibrate and cut etches on a shellac disc. And that is how the recording would be done. And, Indian musicians, while singing, they tend to move their heads and hands and so on as the rag overtakes you. That would spoil the quality of the acoustic energy that's going into the horn. So there would be two agents who would hold your head, your hands, and push you into that horn and ask you to bellow hard. So, the logistic challenges that were there were immense. And also the creative challenges. These recordings came only of 3 minutes duration. And in those 3 minutes, like Pressy writing in literature, you had to condense everything into a short capsule and present it to the audience in a manner that also interests, excites, and these records had to sell. So today we are talking of women empowerment and all of that, whereas 120 years ago, these unknown, unsung women of that era across India, as I said, Gauhar Jaan was the pioneer, but there were several others: Zohrabai Agrewali, Janki Bai of Allahabad, Malka Jaan of Agra, Noti Binodini from Calcutta, Achan Bai of Bombay, Bai Sundra Bai of Pune. From the south, you had women like Salem Godavari, Bangalore Nagaratnamma, Coimbatore Tai, Dhanakoti Ammal of Kanchipuram, all names that have been wiped away in the pages of history, into the dustbins of history, literally. These were the ones who took the lead. And if they had not, done that daring act 120 years ago, I think the Indian music industry, sound engineering would not have taken the leap that it did today. So this never-ending, never-dying kind of a spirit of the human being, and particularly a woman's resilience, that is something that I think would, through stories that I have portrayed, through the books like this, I think that is what would resonate more to today's generation.
Yes, I think that's very inspirational, to look at these stories and to actually learn in a manner that, you can spark a change by doing something small and start that way. I think that's truly very inspirational. And about the tribal heroes, what do you think were the lessons that our generation can take away?
Hi, Shreya. Good to meet you again.
Mm-hmm.
See, like I said, I mean, the mainstream freedom movement, if you ask me, was a lot more sorted, was a lot more easier. The fight in the jungles used to be that much more layered and that much more nuanced, because the Britishers were largely centered in the urban centers. The administrative headquarters used to be in the urban places. So most of the atrocities, or most of the atrocities in the rural areas or the jungles would be outsourced. Number one, on the one hand, to the landlords, and on the other hand, to the missionaries after 1850s, when, as a plan, the Britishers decided that cultural subjugation, read conversions, were to be an equally important part of their rule over here. So for an average jungli, for an average Adivasi, to battle the Britishers was that much more layered, because on the one hand, he would have to, battle the conversion missionaries. On the other hand, he would have to battle the landlords, and both of these would actually act as offshoots to the Britishers, to whom he would never really have an access. So if you take the example of the 1855 Santhal insurrection, which I, in fact, believe was one of the biggest tribal revolutions, not just tribal revolutions, but even, was one of the biggest revolutions in our history. When it started in a small village called Bhognadi in present-day Jharkhand, the villagers were not even aware that at one point of time they would be facing the Britishers. So their attack was largely centered on the zamindars, on the landlords who continued to carry out the atrocities. It was when they encountered the Britishers a month down the line or a few weeks down the line that they realized the enormity of the challenge. And yet, they were prepared for a good 6 months battle. So in fact, one of the first events which I had for Birsa Munda, the cover unveiling, was done by Mr. Suresh Prabhu. And Suresh Prabhu has no connection with Jharkhand, but when he read about Birsa Munda, he was equally intrigued by the fact that in those days, with such limited modes of commutation as well as communication, it was nothing short of phenomenal to organize a guerrilla warfare of that magnitude in the jungles. And in fact, I would believe that a lot more research needs to be done on this, but I would not be surprised if someone were to tell me that Subhash Chandra Bose in some measure was inspired by the story of Birsa Munda, because, if you look at his, he was born and brought up in Kolkata. And in those days, hearsay of stories which have unfolded in nearby districts would be one of the major sources of your future planning. So I'm sure the information about Birsa Munda's revolution would have inspired him in his plans of setting up an international army, because what he did 40 years later on an international scale was what Birsa Munda did in a short span of 3 or 4 districts. But the level of warfare, the level of precision and planning which had gone into creating a private army of Adivasis to battle the Britishers, I think was nothing short of extraordinary. So I think there is a lot to be learned from these uneducated tribal freedom fighters, who in fact showed a kind of the level of precision, the level of planning, which would even, humble some of the biggest warfare gurus in contemporary age.
Thank you. Next, we have Dia. She's been also a co-host and co-founder of this series. Yes.
Yes. Hello. It's always been a privilege to listen to you both. No doubt about it. It's always an honor. I just have 2 questions, one for each of you, and it's related to the process of writing the book. So I'll get right into it. I'll ask Vikram sir first. So you have had first-hand experience now with getting your own book translated. And I would like to know that is the translation able to do justice to the true essence of the book? I've always wondered this, since there are many quotes, as we know, in certain languages, when we convert it into another language, they lose the meaning to it, the feeling to it, so as to say. So I would like to ask, what has been your experience with this?
Yeah, thank you, Dia. I think that's a great question, because it's, people like Tuhin and I, we write in English, but I think English books reach only a very small section of society, as much as we are probably in the eye all the time, thanks to the way the media is structured and our bias towards English. But I think even when it comes to newspapers and so on, I think it's what we would call as regional languages in India, the actual Indian languages, their reach is a lot more. And that's why I've been very keen that all my books so far, we've got it translated into multiple languages, Hindi, Marathi, Bengali, Tamil, Kannada, many of them. To kind of break this ceiling that an English book remains restricted to a very elite group which would read it, probably 5% of the population of India, perhaps, not more than that. Whereas immediately through a Hindi book, the entire heartland of India is covered. But what you brought out is very, very important, that it needs to be done by someone who's skillful, someone who understands both the languages very well, needs to have a good command of English to start with, to be able to understand the nuances that the author in the original has written, and to also have a better command in the language that he or she is translating into, and so that, as you said, nothing should be lost in translation. So for that, I have particularly been very, very choosy about the kind of publishers I give out the rights to of the English book for translation. And most of them, publishers like Vani Prakashan and so on in Hindi, or Ananda Prakashan in Bengali. These are standards in their respective languages. So we would expect a certain amount of due diligence. And also I look very closely at the credentials of the person who's translating it, so that they have a body of work, they have experience of translating earlier works from English to their respective language. And I'm quite happy to say that, including this Gauhar Jaan book, when it was translated into Marathi, Gauhar Jaan Mhantat Mala, that was the Marathi book which came out in 2015 or 16, that book too won the Sahitya Academy Translation Award. So I was very, very happy that the same book which won the award in the original in English also won a translation prize, which showed that the choice of the publisher and the translator was good. So I think every author needs to be very careful. People usually just give away their rights to any publisher or any translator. One needs to take a lot of due diligence and care as to whom they assign. It's like literally giving your baby away to someone else to dress them up in a different way and send them to school. So, you need to take that care as to how they would do what they would do with your child.
Right. That makes sense. I've always wondered this, since we have had so many great books translated into so many languages like yours and Tuhin sir's. So that makes sense. My next question is to Tuhin sir. You have written 17 brilliant stories in your book, and all of them, no doubt, would have required extensive research. And you must have had to write a lot of these. You must have had to compile them into a limited number of words. So what was your experience writing each story? Was it difficult to cut down on the number of words? Did you want to write more?
No, in fact, my books have had varied lengths. So the previous book, Birsa Munda, is a good 95,000 words a book. But this one, the collection of 17 stories, is only about 45,000 words, which means that each of the stories is on an average 2,500 words each. So I would say the whole, the objective and the idea behind the book is what should determine the length of the stories, each story, or if it's one story, the length of it should be determined by the objective. So in this particular case, I was very clear that these need to be very compact stories, because, like unlike Vikram, I am not a historian and I have no pretense of being one. So in creating these stories and retelling these stories, I was essentially trying to expand the narrative, which the Honorable Prime Minister has very graciously been championing, of honoring the unsung warriors of our freedom movement. So, I don't know whether Vikram has received my book, but when he does receive the book, it would be great, if he takes a fancy to one of the 17 stories and as a historian decides to, write a full-fledged book on them. But insofar as I'm concerned, because I am into multiple things, and unfortunately, as a writer, I think I am probably not able to devote as much time as Vikram would. I have my limitations as a writer, and especially these books are co-written. But I think the objective behind this particular book was to create compact stories which could be a ready reckoner for the present generation, which is unaware of a whole parallel freedom movement which has existed but not been acknowledged.
Yeah, I'll move on to Kabir Dev. He had a question for Vikram. In fact, Kabir Dev is an Isaacal International Award-winning poet for his book Irfan, His Life, Philosophy and Shades, and is currently working on the retelling of Kama Sutra. Kabir, will you like to please switch on your video? Yes.
Hello, ma'am. Congratulations, both of you, for your books. I absolutely loved Vikram sir's Gauhar Jaan, and I also said him personally about this. And also, congratulations for becoming the fellow of the Royal Historical Society. It's such a pleasure to meet both of you. And I have two questions. One to Vikram sir, that how important is the geographical location when we speak of someone like Gauhar Jaan, or someone means normally they fall under the category of tawaifs. So whenever we speak of them, the geographical location becomes very important. And also, how can the contemporary Indian society understand someone like Gauhar Jaan? If, for example, they haven't gone through the book, if they have heard somewhere that Gauhar Jaan used to exist. So how can the society take someone like her?
Yeah, thank you, Kabir. And I think it's the geographical location that you mentioned, that was very much a part of their existence. So even Gauhar Jaan would always be called Gauhar Jaan Kalkatte Wali. So, because this people from the same name, there were Gauhar Jaan of Patiala, there was one Gauhar Jaan of in Bijapur, there was one in Jaipur, the people with the same names across the country. So the place from which they came, I think that's a very important marker in music, particularly in India. It's a very strange tradition where people do append the name of the place they come from. In Carnatic music also, if you see, a lot of artists are referenced by the place they come from. Bombay Jayashree. Bombay is not part of her name, but then the very fact that she comes from Bombay, she gets the name Bombay Jayashree. Semmangudi Srinivas Iyer. Semmangudi is a village in Tamil Nadu, and that becomes part of his name. So the name of the place that they came from was always a part of the way they were identified. So that's a very good observation that you made about how the geography plays an important role. But I think the geographical location, for me, it is important even when one writes a biography, because it's a common fashion for biographers to subtitle their book as The Life and Times of so and so. My book is also called The Life and Times of a Musician, but usually we concentrate only on the life. We seldom look at the times, and because that's very important, I think, for a historian, for a biographer, to also focus on the times in which that particular character lived, because the circumstances, the surroundings, the place, the political circumstances, social conditions, the cultural, political, all of that would go into influencing the person's life, and in turn they would be influencing the times. So this investigation into the times is very important, and in that the place where they came from also matters immensely. Now, how does one look at and appreciate someone like this? It's very important that, it's really saddening that despite all these achievements of these women, as I mentioned in my opening comments, they have been literally pushed away to the dustbins of history, willfully so, demonized as common prostitutes, which were not what the wives and Devdasis were. But then the prudery of the British government, the missionaries, and also the elite Indians, it ensured there was an anti-nautch campaign against them, the Devdasi Prohibition Act, all of which ensured that most of these women were deprived, they were prevented from performing itself. Any woman who was performing on stage, whether it was music or dance, was branded as a prostitute and not even given the due that she was a custodian of the art for centuries, and despite that, totally thrown away with no parallel alternatives for a livelihood. So many of them died in penury, many of them resorted to flesh trade, and even after independence, this prejudice against these women continued. You'll be quite horrified to know that even, where in independent India, the All India Radio, when women had to go and record, they had to actually produce a marriage certificate to say, you came from a respectable family, that you were married. And so most of them had the name of Devi or Begum and all of that to show that they belong to a respected family. They didn't come from a background like this. This was the stigma that was attached to several of these women who actually contributed so much to the art. So, but today their voices, which ideally would have been subaltern voices, like Tuhin's work, which brings these unknown heroes from different parts of India in the context of the freedom struggle. These people were heroes in their field of the cultural space, but they too have been crushed. And for decades and decades, the Marxist historians have been talking about subaltern voices, lending voice to the voiceless and all of that. And despite that, we have so many of these heroes and heroines actually not being brought out to the fore, which is so unfortunate. And so I would see the relevance of someone like Gauhar Jaan and women like her in this context of not only their achievements that they did, as I mentioned, which put the Indian music industry on the path that it went on to, but at the same time, I would also look at it as a revival of the women's voices that were suppressed willfully and quite audaciously. And that is why, most of these women, some of them who were ingenious enough, they made a shift to the film industry. The early film industry, whether it was Hindi or Tamil or any other language, it was a lot of the actresses came from such backgrounds. Nargis's mother, Jaddan Bai, she was also, of the Tavaif background. Even someone like an M.S. Subbulakshmi came from a Devdasi background, and then she had to be rebranded into something else. This story is one of an undying human spirit of how women of our country have always been resilient, have always faced challenges. When a new technology came, they adapted to it. When social stigma was brought into their face, they reinvented themselves yet again, went away from performance, took to cinema, and singing, dancing, acting came naturally to them. So they made use of this opportunity in multiple ways. And so the film industry too, in the nascent era, was thanks to the contributions of several of these women. So I think that is where I would posit the contributions and the role and relevance of women like this.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Vikram sir. I just had a small question for Tuhin sir. Sir, I texted you regarding Birsa Munda, and I loved the book. Now, what happens is that someone like Birsa Munda, what we know that Indian communists or Marxists always try to subscribe to anyone who is a tribe, that is a tribal story or a tribal person. Now, in my whole life since I'm 29, so whenever I used to read about Birsa Munda, I used to find that most of these people are from Marxist background, and they wrote a story on Birsa Munda and his valor and everything, but that was from a very communist perspective. So how hard it was for you to actually understand Birsa Munda and also to dig out all the stories that have been overlapped by the communists of India?
Hi, Kabir, how are you? So, even while I was writing, during the process of my writing the book, there was a controversy when the present CM of Jharkhand had made a very controversial comment that Adivasis were never Hindus, will never be. And I had kind of confronted that comment with a very detailed article in the print. So unfortunately, intellectual dishonesty has been the hallmark of communists as well as some of the other political parties in our country. But since this is not a political discussion, I would not trade into that. But, like for Birsa Munda, especially since it's the entire book is based on that one character, there was extensive research vis-a-vis my other book. I had personally, researched on Birsa Munda for a good 2 years. And in fact, the story had been with me since 2016. And I can tell you that most of the canards, most of the falsehoods which have been spread by communist historians are pretty much unfounded. Between 1890 and 1894, when Birsa was a wanderer in the jungles, he came in contact with a Vaishnavite guru called Anand Pandey. And that Vaishnavite guru had a big influence on the rest of his life. So when he returned in 1894 back to his village in a completely spiritually awakened avatar, he would recite incidents from the Gita and Mahabharata, which were taught to him by Anand Pandey. So this entire theory that Adivasis are separate from Hindus merely because of the habitat or merely because of the nature gods they worship is pretty much unfounded. In fact, the worship of Shiva predates its worship in temples. And in fact, I have referred to one of the most exhaustive research papers on that, where even 1,000 years ago, there has been evidence of Lord Shiva being worshipped by Adivasis on hilltops across the country. So I think the best that we can do right now is to ignore communist historians, because they are past their expiry date. They don't need to be taken seriously, and we shouldn't be apologetic about rewriting our history, because unfortunately, our history was prejudiced, our history was lopsided, and there is no shame in correcting something which was so obviously flawed.
Thank you, sir. Actually, I asked this question because I am working on Kama Sutra and its retelling. So it's pretty hard to find the actual things that Vatsayana actually wrote or actually scribbled in through his own mind. So therefore, it's pretty hard for me to translate. So I'm just retelling this whole book. So therefore, I asked you this question. Thank you so much.
Let me just give you this good news. I will make a formal announcement sometime in September, but Birsa Munda will soon be a television series.
Okay.
So a lot of these misconceptions created by communist historians will be perpetually buried.
It's so great to hear.
Thank you, Kabir, and best of luck with your book. Next we have Mr. Deepak Koot. He's a career banker and currently a consultant for corporates and financial institutions based in Middle East. Hi, Deepak.
Hi, Neeta. Thanks a lot. And sorry, I can't turn my video on at the moment. So Neeta, first of all, congratulations on the century milestone. I've been introduced to so many great authors and books for which actually I owe you a big thanks. Vikram, I think our roads have crossed again. My first question to you was on Savarkar, if you recall. Maybe you won't, but that was a very interesting book. And thanks to Neeta that I got a chance to read that book and clear a lot of my doubts about Savarkar, which I had. This time, my question is for Mrs. Sinha, actually. So, Tuhin, books on our freedom struggle, they've always kind of inspired me. And I've read quite a few. And this surely stands out. And I'm very, very keen to get my hands on the book because I think it talks about unsung heroes. So congratulations for the book.
Sure.
Now, my question for you, Tuhin, is I'm quite keen to hear on how you got so much of information and how it was validated. I mean, yes, you just talked about somebody else's history. Now, Vikram's book, that goes just back to 120 years. But Tuhin, I think yours goes back in a time and a place where the tribals actually fought with bows and arrows. And furthermore, I guess Bharat included the present-day Pakistan and Bangladesh. So how challenging was that part of data gathering and validation? I mean, I heard Vikram talk about he threw in a lot of countries from where he had to get information, with that culminated in his book. And so one was on data gathering and validation. And the second question, if I may ask, would be, you talked about our history being elitist. So is there any plan to get some, if not all of this history in the textbooks of India? Because I think it should be. So that's the reason I asked this question. So whoever wants to take it, Vikram.
So, in fact, the part of, in fact, my books, my characters also don't go beyond 200 years. So Birsa Munda lived between 1875 to 1900. And since I have grown up hearing about Birsa Munda's valor, stories of his valor, stories of his sacrifice, stories of his revolution, all I needed to do was to assemble a lot of these materials, speak to people in his villages, because in fact, I spoke to a couple of descendants of his while writing the book. I spoke to one of the senior most ex-MPs, tribal MPs of India, Mr. Kariya Munda, who had been an MP from 1977 till 2019, and who pretty much, was a member of parliament from the same constituency which was the epicenter of Birsa Munda's revolution. So I think, I depended upon certain first-hand sources of information, apart from reading up a whole lot of articles available on the net. But like I said, I mean, the other book, which has just come out, The Great Tribal Warriors of Bharat, more than a history book, it is a summation, it is a compact retelling of these stories, by referring to a whole lot of articles available at every, at any given place, whichever was available to us. In fact, some of the descendants of two of these freedom fighters are still alive. Helen Lepcha was one of the freedom fighters whose descendants are still alive. My co-author spoke to them. But like I said, I mean, these are very compact stories told in 2,500 words each on an average. They still need to be developed into a proper biography. And, I think historians like Vikram and any other, historian who might want to approach it, I would be most happy to help them out and develop, to help them develop this into a book, each of these characters' stories into a book of its own.
Great.
Thank you very much. Quite
And
inspiring.
the second part, Vikram, you'd like to answer? You had a second question, right?
Yeah, I had a second question, which is, if there is any plans to get, I fully agree that our history has been quite elitist. Is there any plan to get some, if not all of this, which includes Gauhar Khan as well? Gauhar Jaan as well.
Gauhar Khan is the infamous.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Well, it's the right question, but I think addressed to the wrong person, because I am not in the government, and and I don't know how these stories and in fact our textbooks itself can be changed. They need to be. In fact, for the last 8 years, we've continued with the same kind of textbooks, which are very lopsided, and I've spoken repeatedly at several fora about. I think how there's an urgent need to revisit our history, particularly at the school level, which is where I think a young person in India, probably that's the first and last brush with Indian history. After, class 10 or 12, many of them opt out of the subject. So that's the limited time when they learn about their own past, their heritage. And so it's very important. But unfortunately, I don't see much traction building up there. At least in a formal capacity within the school curriculum. A lot of private players have been working towards that. I was recently a couple of months back at the Chinmaya mission schools in Chennai. They, along with the Vidya Bharati set of schools with the RSS runs in Chennai and Tamil Nadu, almost whole of Tamil Nadu, they've devised a completely new set of books for classes 6, 7, and 8. which look at Indian history from an Indian point of view. Of course, it would probably, but 9th and 10th, they come back to the NCERT syllabus. So I don't know what it would do to a child, because, the child may just end up getting very confused also, though it's a very laudable attempt. 6 to 8, you're reading about, how, say, someone like an Aurangzeb was a bigoted ruler. And then suddenly in the 9th, you probably look at him as a secular ruler. And then, you get all totally confused. But those confusions apart, I think private attempts have been made on revising history. An urgent need for that. I think the government also needs to step in and do their bit on this. In fact, I'm very happy to also announce that my own new book, which is going to come out in October, November this year, is called Brave Hearts of Bharat. And this would actually bring to light about 15 such people from across India, length and breadth of India, to also remove what I always call the Delhi centricity of our history. Everything is so focused around even small dynasties which rule Delhi, whereas large swathes of the country remain underrepresented or non-represented. The northeast of India doesn't feature, southern India doesn't feature, even the Marathas, for all their contribution, they don't feature in the way they should. And also our history is told as a long laundry list of battles that we lost, as if we were just a land of losers who kept inviting invaders from across the world and kept losing. But if we are around as a civilization, we must have won some battles, we must have put some resistance. So what are those stories of true valor? Who are those heroes? Who are those heroines, importantly, who put this resistance? So people like Lalitaditya of Kashmir, who drove away the Arabs beyond the Sindh invasion. They could not conquer most of India. Why was that? It was thanks to people like Lalitaditya. So he's one of them. Then there's Rani Naiki Devi of Gujarat, who defeated Muhammad Ghori, and so much so that Muhammad Ghori never turned towards Gujarat again. And Kanhoji Angre, the first admiral in the Maratha Navy under the successors of Shivaji Maharaj, and how he ensured that the Portuguese, the English East India Company, and also the Siddhis and others were kept at bay and was never conquered. Rana Kumbha, the unconquered king of India, so to say, he built what is probably the second wall, longest wall after the Great Wall of China. The Kumbhalgarh Fort wall is the second longest wall in the world. But then we do not, celebrate people like this. Lachit Borphokon from Assam, who ensured that the Mughals never captured Kamrup. And in the south, you had people like Rani Abbakka from Karnataka, who defeated the Portuguese army. Marthanda Varma in Kerala, who defeated the Dutch East India Company. So numerous such people. Banda Singh Bahadur from Punjab, who established the first Sikh state several decades before Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So a compilation of several of these heroes, and most importantly, as I said, heroines, women, a lot of women rulers who also have not got their due in our history books. It's his story, it becomes, and not her story. So I think that lopsided, the balance also needs to be corrected there.
I think thanks a lot, Vikram. I won't be going back to school again.
Thank you.
So I was just going to say I won't be going back to school again, but I look forward to reading your books and catching up on my history. Keep writing, Vikram. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak, for joining in from all parts of the world. Wherever you are, you join us, and that's such a big motivation. And Vikram, now we'll be looking forward to October and your new book, definitely. So next we have Mr. Sushil Podar. He's the Commissioner of Income Tax, Mumbai, and he's written a fantastic book, Blaze, with his wife, Nidhi Podar, and it's been released by Rupa, and I think it is one of the best sellers of Rupa. Yes, Sushilji.
Good evening, everyone. And while congratulating Vikram Sampath for writing the book Mera Naam, Gauhar Jaan, my question is to Tuhinji, my good friend. And Tuhinji, it really fills my heart when I see book coming on tribal heroes back to back in less than 6 months' time. Birsa Munda and now the great tribal warriors of Bharat. And when you write Bharat, it means a lot. It's not India. Someone was telling Bharat. The challenge is to reach out to this type of story to the masses, as much to the tribal people, as much to the mainstream society. Well, we have written the book. If you ask me, there are 4 layers. You have written a book. Suppose someone has written a book. The first stage is creating awareness, where platform like print series, they create awareness about the book. Now, the second challenge is to ensure someone buys the book. But buying does not suffice the purpose. I have bought the book, I have put it on my shelf in living room. The third is I need to read that book. And the fourth is, which is the most challenging, is to absorb the wisdom of the book and then start reflecting. Books like this, Tribal Warriors and Birsa Munda, someone will have to read, reflect. And then only the purpose of this book is going to be served. Now, in the change scenario, modern times, we have, practice like podcasts, audible books, and now you were just talking about web series, so that more awareness can be created. So this is more like observation rather than asking you a question. What sort of things you are planning to reach out the content of this book to general masses?
Greetings, Sushilji. Sushilji, there is a saying, God give me the courage to change the things I can and to endure the things I can't change. So I think I'm doing things which are within my capabilities. I'm trying to get my books made into films / OTT series / TV series. That is something which I can try and do. But to make people read books, even after buying, if they're not willing to read, that is something, unfortunately, I can't do. So that is something, conversion, audiovisual conversion, number one, and translation of these books into multiple regional languages are things which authors are doing and which I have been consciously trying to do as much as possible to promote the books, to make them reach out to as many people as possible. The rest, I think, over a period of time, we have made a conscious start. We have made an effort to bring about a change in the thought process of people. The results will show in a decade or two, because any change takes its own time to show, for the results to show. But I think a decisive change has begun, and that is what is more important.
Thank you so much. And I wish you all the best for the success.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sushilji, for always taking out time from your busy schedule. Next, we have Yuvraj Dhingra. He's a civil services aspirant. He has just done away with his 12th exams. And there's a lot of hope we have from children like Yuvraj for the future. Yes, Yuvraj.
Good evening, everyone. So congratulations to both of you, sir. And, it's always an honor for me to listen to people who speak so passionately about different themes and issues that they have always picked up. So my question is specifically for Vikram, sir. So, art, culture, and literature have always remained an integral part of the historical ages. And Gauhar Jaan ji was undoubtedly, the master of her own art. So I would like to ask that as a historian, you would obviously have to, face different kinds of sources. So the same source won't portray the same person in the same manner as the other sources. So you have different accounts, and plus it would obviously be marked by stark contrast in what the people would have, actually perceived her to be. So in such a scenario, in such a multiplicity of sources scenario, how do you actually, trudge along this whole journey? And how do you actually pick up, okay, I need to pick up this account specifically in order to, make people aware about certain things about a person's life? And plus, how do you check the veracity of an account? Like, okay, this account is, actually authentic or not?
Yeah. Thank you, Yuvraj. I think that's a very wonderful question. And that comes back to a lot of, historical methodology and research methodology training that we receive in our process of becoming a historian, as to how do you, what sources do you consider as important and what you don't. Like, for instance, I mean, while you say there would be multiplicity of sources, there's also paucity of sources. In the case of Savarkar, there was probably a multiplicity of sources. There were so many accounts from so many places. Whereas in a case like Gauhar Jaan, there was a paucity, because lack of documentation, particularly when it comes to the arts, is a very major problem that we face in our country. Even artists don't maintain their own their own life stories or something. The art is always considered bigger than the artist. Who am I after all? My art is bigger. I don't know how many of us as writers, Tuhin, I think we also need to start writing our own stories, our own memoirs, because our biographies would also be as important, maybe. I'm presumptuous enough to assume that someone would be interested in reading our lives. But, I think as artists, if we are writing our own lives, that also gives a window into the times that we lived in and did what we did. But that's not the case in India compared to what other countries do. So in such a case, it's a paucity of sources. But there, for instance, in Gauhar Jaan's time, when I went around interviewing people, first of all, very few musicians had even heard about her despite those achievements. But the few people who knew about her, especially the old timers, old ustads and pandits, they would, normally tell me this weird story. Now, she was of a Anglo-Indian background, quite interestingly. Someone with a name like that, she was not even an Indian. She was born of a Hindu grandmother, a British grandfather, an Armenian Christian father, and she was in fact baptized as Eileen Angelina Yoward in the Holy Trinity Church in Allahabad, and then her mother converted to Islam and became a Tawaif, and that's how she got the name Gauhar Jaan. Now, so a lot of these old timers would say, वो इतनी सफेद थी, गोरी थी कि जब वो पान खाती थी तो you could see the red juice going down her throat, almost making her sound like a water lizard and less of a human. So things like this, which you then use your interpretation, your own intelligence to say, acha, this sounds a little offlandish. And a lot of documentation when it comes to the world of music and art and culture in India is gossips like this. There is very little written content. So then it comes to the subjectivity of the person using those materials to see which of it you are going to use in your narrative and which is extraneous or sounds ridiculous to give away. But when it comes to multiplicity of sources, like it did in Savarkar, in research methodology, there's this entire technique of triangulation of facts, where the same fact is triangulated through multiple sources, and a midpoint is then arrived at. Contradictory viewpoints about the same incident or issue is taken, and then multiple viewpoints are then balanced out to come to a considered narrative. So that is done when there are more sources. The problem, more often than not, especially when it comes to documentation of the arts, is a lack of sources, which I think most people suffer from.
Right, definitely, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and best wishes for your IAS preparation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Yuvraj. Children like you give us a lot of hope for future. I'd like to invite Asha Dhaima in the meantime.
Yeah. And greetings to Vikram and Tuhin, both of you. This is my second chance to listen to you. I'm a privileged one here. So my question, I just dropped a message for everyone. Actually impressed with Gauhar Jaan, and especially the recent information that she was so white that there were stories about her fair complexion. So I was wondering, this woman, ambitious she was. She traveled all the way from Bengal to Mysore. She was ambitious and must have had excellent talent also. So I was wondering, she must have used this art, her beauty, her talent, her contacts. I mean, must have used them to the fullest to reach where she reached, like gramophone and everything. So Vikram, would you tell us more about her personality as a woman, as an artist, as a skillful, using the context must be manipulative also, because you cannot reach to that level without skillful, tactful manipulations at times. So throw a light on this.
Well, more than manipulative, I think she was a feisty woman, a very hedonistic woman, and recording gave that luxury to all of them. As I said, she was charging so much per recording session. So overnight, she became a rock star, not only within India, but even her pictures were appearing on matchboxes made in Austria. So, that was the power of global mass media, where overnight a Tawaif in some non-decrepit street in Calcutta could become a international sensation like this, and be recognized. But that, I think, also got to their many of their heads, and to in the way they led their life. Gauhar Jaan, for instance, was infamous for throwing parties, very costly parties, when her cat gave birth to kittens, and she gave it back to everyone, from Mahatma Gandhi himself. I mean, Gandhiji once had told her, requested her to help raise funds for the Congress party through a fundraising concert. Now, she agreed, but with a condition that Gandhiji should be personally present at the concert. Only then she would sing. Now, he was a little amused by this lady who was putting up, preconditions for her support, but then he agreed. And then, but on the day of the concert, it was a runaway success. They had earned about 24,000 rupees only through sale of tickets, which was a huge amount those days. But Gandhiji could not come to this program. And that is when, he'd sent a representative, Maulana Shaukat Ali, as his representative to the concert. Now, after the program, when Shaukat Ali went to collect the money from her, he was surprised that she gave him only 12,000 out of the 24,000 that was collected. And when he asked, what about the rest of the money? She said, you please go and tell your Mahatma that he talks about honesty and integrity. By sending you and not coming himself, he has kept only half his promise. So I will also give you only half the amount of money that I have, gathered. So that was a kind of chutzpah, that the power of your art gives you also that confidence to give it back to anybody, be it a Gandhi. When the Viceroy, I mean, she was infamous rather, to drive through the thoroughfares of Calcutta in her 6-horse driven buggy, and dressed in all her regal finery and all of that. And once when she was driving through Eden Gardens and all that part of Calcutta, the Viceroy's cavalcade actually crossed hers, and looking at her beauty, her color, her jewelries and all of that, he thought she was the Maharani of some riyasat, and actually doffed his hat in reverence. She also acknowledged him, but then drove away. And later, when he realized that she was a common Tawaif of the city, he was terribly enraged. And he said this was a crime for common Indians to drive phaetons and so on in Calcutta then, and put a fine of 1,000 rupees for that. Now, it is said that she continued to pay 1,000 rupees every day, but went on her joyrides, defying the government rules. There was once the Maharaja of Datia who wanted her to perform at his court, and she said, Datia is too small a principality for me, I'm not going to come. And she put up a huge precondition that book an entire train for me. And the Maharaja actually did that, and 111 people traveled in that train, from her Khansama to Bawarchi to her maid, her horses, everything went all the way from Calcutta to Datia. So I think this was the kind of person that she was. But I wouldn't call someone like her manipulative. On the other hand, extremely poor fiscal management, falling in love with all the wrong men who fell in love with her only for her money, like the common narrative of many of her Tawaif's life, and who embezzled her funds, cheated her, and actually brought her to a state of penury and beggary from this condition that she was. And she got invited to Mysore when she was literally selling off her compositions at 1 rupee each, someone who lived such a hedonistic life. And that's when the Maharaja of Mysore invited her there as a state guest, and she lived there only for 2 years and died there. So on the contrary of being a manipulative person, she was, I think, people like her in those days, and artists in general, they tend to be very trusting of people who they think, they love and they can confide in and so on. But not all the time that trust is actually reciprocated. You can be betrayed, and betrayed pretty badly, like she was in this case.
Thank you, Vikram. The way you have portrayed the personality of this woman and the life of this woman, she is already intriguing me, inspiring me. I'm so proud of this member belonging to our species as a woman. I'm sure I'm going to read this book, and I'm sure she would be like my idol. Thanks, Vikram. Thank you.
Thank you.
Because of the time, we'll take last two questions, one each for Vikram and one for Tuhin. One question is from Vijay Shankar. He is unable to switch on his video. So British had created allies among the local population. Why didn't they create allies among tribals? This question is for you, Tuhin.
As I mentioned, the Britishers were largely centered in urban areas, and their atrocities, or even the rule over tribal areas, was largely outsourced to the zamindars. So that is one of the reasons they were too condescending. They were concerned about their health. They knew that if they spent too much time in the remote areas, probably they were not used to the raw food and the water over there. So that is one of the reasons they never made an effort to reach out to beyond the urban edifices or beyond the urban centers where the offices were centered. That is the reason why they couldn't. And also the language. The language is the other part. The tribals could barely speak their local languages, whether it was Mundari or Santhali in the areas of Jharkhand, or in the Northeast, they would again speak their native languages. The very few Britishers would be able to even partially speak those languages.
Right. We have Mr. Amit Bansal. He's IIM Ahmedabad alumni, and he's the author of the book Call of Mahadev. And he had a question for Vikram, I think. That's what he meant. Yes.
Namaskar, Vikram. You did mention a while back that some private attempts are being made to teach the correct Indian history. I just want to know if there is an ongoing project or an effort in the government to come out with officially revised textbooks, or there's nothing of that sort happening.
As I said, right question, but to the wrong person. I'm not in the government or part of it, or even part of the party. So I don't know what's going on. Maybe Tuhin would be better placed to know what's going on there. But as far as I know, I have no clue, because I usually stay away from politics as well as from governments, unless asked specifically to do something for it. But so far as I know, there's been nothing.
Your comments, Tuhin, on this, since you are from...
Many of these changes anyway happen over a period of time. They don't happen. They happen somewhat discreetly, because in the India that we live in, the kind of inane issues which evoke protest. So an issue like this would anyway evoke massive protest, because there is an entire industry which now thrives upon professional protesting. So, but yes, I mean, these are ongoing changes. They happen, they don't happen all at one time, but they are ongoing changes which happen. For example, a new chapter on Birsa Munda being added I'm just giving you an example. If it happens in the 150th year of Birsa Munda ji's life, which would be between 2024 and 2025. Similarly, other changes happen from time to time without really making, a lot of noise about them.
Thank you, Tuhin. Thank you, Vikram, for taking out time. And I would say, we were really excited when we celebrated our 25th episode, and we were thrilled when we reached 50th. And I think today has been one of the most exciting episodes that we ever had today. So any last words from you, and from you, Vikram and Tuhin? Anything that we missed out?
Go ahead, Tuhin.
I really admire the effort, the nurturing that you have put into curating this property, and the way you keep looking out for new books and new authors. I think you are more inclusive than some of the Indian political parties have been, which is absolutely...
It's a very big compliment.
Which is absolutely phenomenal. And I wish your show reaches 1,000 episodes in the years to come. And you also expand beyond books and have an offline event like you have been planning for some time. That would be truly great. And I look forward to that.
Thank you. I've always, loved your advices, and I'm sure I'll take it up in the very near future. Any last words from you, Vikram, that we've missed out or you've missed out talking about?
No, I'd completely echo what Tuhin said. And Neeta, this is my third appearance on your platform. I'd seldom do that unless, there's so much of warmth. There's so much of, it's not like the usual talkathons that we have. I think the manner in which, as he rightly said, you've really nurtured this, and also the people whom you invite, you make them feel so wanted and so loved. I think that is what has helped it grow to what it has. And I hope even when we met in Delhi, you did mention that, there's this desire in you to make this an offline event, going out of these boxes where we can actually meet each other in person. I think I hope and pray and wish that that dream comes true also very soon, and we all meet each other in person now that hopefully the pandemic, the worst of it, is behind us. So many congratulations to you, to the entire team, to Shreya, to everyone who's been part of the effort. And may there be several more opinions that bloom on your platform.